بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أحسن الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. So today this is the 32nd lesson in our series on this book Al-Ubudiyyah of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah with the commentary of Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan. And in the previous lesson we finished on the point that a person who claims to love something, then he would be willing to, bear harms and hardships and difficulties in order to win the love or the pleasure of that, thing or that person or being that he claims to love. As Ibn Taymiyyah said, وَمَعْلُومٌ أَنَّ الْمَحْبُوبَاتِ لَا تُنَالُ غالبا إلا باحتمال المكروهات. He says it's known that the things that a person loves, they are not obtained overwhelmingly except by bearing things which one does not like, bearing things which are dislikable, right? So you have to bear dislikable things in order to gain those things which you love. And so this is something universal. This is not, specific to any person of any creed. This is a universal thing which everybody knows and experiences in their life, that something that you have a liking for, that you love, then you have to bear harms and hardships and difficulties in order to attain them. So we finished off on that sentence. And Shaykh al-Fawzan, he made the comment here, and he said that, that which you love doesn't just come to you. There has to be some degree of effort and sacrifice. And so the clearest example of this, the greatest example of this, is paradise. Now, paradise, we know it's, as occurs in the hadith, it is surrounded by hardships and things which a person, dislikes. This is the nature of what paradise is surrounded with. Conversely, hellfire is surrounded by lusts and desires and likable things. So the Shaykh continues and says that paradise is something that a person loves, but it cannot be attained except by bearing hardships, doing righteous actions, striving in the path of Allah, spending, doing righteous deeds, right? So a person has to bear dislikable things. As the Shaykh mentions the hadith, in fact, حُفَّتِ الْجَنَّةُ بِالْمَكَارِحِ وَحُفَّتِ النَّارُ بِالشَّهَوَاتِ. The paradise is surrounded by dislikable things, and hellfire is surrounded by the desires, by lusts and desires. So that's where we finished in the previous lesson. We're going to continue from this point with the speech of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah. So after mentioning that statement, he then says, سواء كانت محبة صالحة أو فاسدة. So in other words, this principle applies, what he just mentioned, this universal principle that before you can achieve something that you love, you have to bear hardships. This applies irrespective of whether the love is a legitimate, righteous type of love or a corrupt type of love, right? So this applies irrespective. So for example, let's say a man was to pursue a woman which is unlawful for him, or he was to, try to acquire wealth which is unlawful, which is haram, right? Still, that still applies, that he will not achieve that thing except by some degree of sacrifice and bearing some harms and so on and so forth. So this is a universal principle. It applies to everything. And so Ibn Taymiyyah continues, فَالْمُحِبُّونَ لِلْمَالِ وَالرِّئَاسَةِ وَالصُّوَرِ لا ينالون مطالبهم إلا بضرر يلحقهم في الدنيا مع ما يصيبهم من الضرر في الدنيا والآخرة. So he then says that those people who we find that they love wealth, for example, or they love leadership, they love power, or they love a suwar, meaning here, you know, like what they see of women and lusts and desires and which they seek and pursue, they will not achieve their goals except by way of some harm that's going to come to them in this life, alongside the hardships they're going to suffer as a result, both in this life and the hereafter. So all of this is just something we know from our own experience. This is the nature of the things that, you know, to which we have an attachment or love in our heart. They bring with them hardships, difficulties, and in some cases they can also bring hardships in this life and also the next life when they are based upon a corrupt type of love, right, in relation to things which are unlawful. So from this point onwards, Ibn Taymiyyah then, rahimahullah, then makes a very important point, which is something that we should reflect upon as Muslims and as people of Tawheed. And so he says here, فَالْمُحِبُّ لِلَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ إِذَا لَمْ يَحْتَمِلْ مَا يَرَى ذُو الرَّأْيِ من المحبين لغير الله مما يحتملون في حصول محبوبهم دل ذلك على ضعف محبتهم لله. So in essence what he says is that those people, or he who loves Allah and his messenger, so say there's a person who loves Allah and his messenger, or claims to, and if he is not willing to bear those harms and those hardships, those same types of hardships and difficulties which those people who love other than Allah, right? Because there are people who love other things besides Allah. They love, you know, for example, non-Muslims who love their idols or the things that they worship or their deities, or it could be sinful Muslims who love, for example, pursuing their lusts and desires, right? So there's categories of people. So he says that when a person who loves Allah and his messenger, if he is not willing to bear those harms and difficulties which those people who love other than Allah, which they are prepared to bear because of the things that they love, then this indicates a weakness in his love of Allah. Right? This is very simple to understand. So for example, you know, where this is leading towards is in fact the verse in the Quran in which Allah Azza wa Jal, he says, I'll come back to this point after mentioning this verse. So Ibn Taymiyyah says here, إذا كان ما يسلكه أولئك هو الطريق الذي يشير به الأقل ومن المعلوم أن المؤمن أشد حبا لله. So he says it's known that a believer is more intense in his love of Allah, as Allah the Most High says, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَتَّخِذُ مِنْ دُونِ اللَّهِ أَنْدَادًا يُحِبُّونَهُمْ كَحُبِّ اللَّهِ. Amongst mankind are those who take as rivals other than Allah, and they love them more than they love Allah. So let's just wrap this whole point up and decipher what is being said. So we know that a person of Tawheed, he singles out Allah in worship because he loves Allah Azza wa Jal. Allah Azza wa Jal is loved bidhatihi, for his essence. He is the only thing that we love for his essence. Everything else besides Allah is loved for the sake of Allah, because of Allah. It's not loved in and of itself. So only Allah Azza wa Jal is loved, in his essence directly, right? So, and then there are other people who erect deities, right? So they erect gods, they erect deities, and they love them with a type of love that should only be for Allah. And then they are willing to endure hardships and difficulties and trials and tribulations and suffer loss and harm in order to please those things because of the love that they have for those things. Right. So a believer, because he loves Allah Azza wa Jal and his love is more pure, then a believer must be more willing to endure the same types of harms and difficulties and hardships than those people are willing to endure. Do you understand? Like, it doesn't make sense, for example, that if there's a mushrik, Hindu, for example, and he worships his, the multi-headed animal or whatever it is that he worships, and he's willing to climb over mountains and to swim the seas and to endanger his life and to, endure all sorts of harms and spend from his wealth, right, to please that deity or to, fulfill the whatever thing he loves in relation to that deity. It's impossible for him to do that and then a believer not have the same type of love and sacrifice for Allah Azza wa Jal. It's simply not possible, right? And that's what the point that Ibn Taymiyyah he is mentioning, that if a believer cannot bear and is not willing to bear and cannot bear that type of hardship with which those people who love other than Allah and worship other than Allah, which they are prepared to bear, then this is clearly an indication of the weakness of his love, right? It can't clearly be a strong type of love for Allah Azza wa Jal. And so that's the point that Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah is mentioning here. And Shaykh al-Fawzan comments on this point in the notes, and he says that there is no one who claims that he loves Allah, that he loves the Messenger of Allah, except that he must bear in the path of Allah that which he dislikes and that which is hardship upon him. Just like those who love other than Allah, they bear types of hardships for the sake of those whom they love, and they sacrifice, they make effort and they expend from themselves and their wealth, for the sake of their deities, because they love them with an intense and severe type of love. So Ibn Taymiyyah continues and he says, yes, sometimes نعم قد يسلك المحب لضعف عقله وفساد تصوره طريقا لا يحصل بها المطلوب. So he says, sometimes you can find a person who he loves, for example, he loves Allah, or he loves something from the things which are permissible to love and pursue in the worldly affairs, but because of the weakness of his aql, his intellect, right, he's weak-minded in his intellect, what he does is, and also because of a corruption in his thought and his imagination, he might take a path that he thinks is going to help him reach the goal, but which actually isn't. Right? So where Ibn Taymiyyah now is leading to, what we should pay attention to, is leading to the fact that it's one thing to have a mahbub, to love something, and then it's also another thing to actually pursue the right path, right, to reach that end, right? So in other words, let me illustrate this with examples. So there is Allah Azza wa Jal, who is loved, and then in the pursuit of his love you follow means which are legitimate and valid and acceptable to Allah Azza wa Jal, right? But then also you can claim to be someone who loves Allah Azza wa Jal, but you can also pursue means which are illegitimate, which are invalid, and which do not reach to him, right? As we see with innovations, misguidance, people worshipping Allah through things or ways and means which he did not reveal, inventing acts and types of worship, right? This is not a valid means. So likewise in the worldly affairs, in all the worldly affairs, there's exactly the same thing. Like you can, someone might, for example, someone wants to acquire wealth, right? And so there's a lawful way of acquiring wealth, which is, you engage in trade, or the physical labor that you have, you take compensation for it, and all the various things, right? This is a legitimate means. It achieves the objective. But at the same time, stealing also achieves the objective, right? It's still it's a means that actually works, right? So you can rob people, you can burgle people, and you can acquire wealth. It actually works, right? But just because it works doesn't mean that it's lawful, right? So not everything which is a means is actually lawful in the Sharia, right? You can have a child in so many different ways, but not all of them are lawful. You can acquire wealth, but not always, not all of them are actually lawful. So the point Ibn Taymiyyah is mentioning here is that some people who love something, because of a corrupt intellect or a corrupt imagination, they follow a path which is not actually going to lead to the thing that they are pursuing. Ibn Taymiyyah says here, فمثل هذه الطريق لا تحمد إذا كانت المحبة صالحة محمودة فكيف إذا كانت المحبة فاسدة والطريق غير موصل. So he makes the point here, which is that that a person might, because of his weak intellect and corrupt imagination, he might pursue a path that doesn't make him reach the goal, right? So this type of path that he is following is not praiseworthy if his love is a righteous type of love. How then will it be if his love is a corrupt type of love? Right. So what's being explained here is to show that there's different categories of people, and they have different goals and objectives or love, and they pursue the means, right? And those means could be valid and invalid. And the love that they have could be corrupt or could be, righteous. So therefore you have different categories of people that exist, whether in the religious pursuits, which is what we are talking about here, and even in the worldly pursuits, right? So sticking to the examples I gave before, you have a person of Tawheed upon the Sunnah, loves Allah, loves the Messenger, and he follows the Sunnah, sticks to the Sunnah. So he's a person with a righteous love and with a genuine path, right? So there's the objective and then the means, right? Then you have a person who says he loves Allah and the Messenger, but he's engrossed in innovations, right? He thinks that, singing poems and this and whatever, and without acting upon the obligations and things like that, sticking to Sunnah, he thinks this is going to earn him the love of Allah. So this is a mistake. The love is righteous, is correct, right? It's the love for Allah Azza wa Jal, but the means is invalid. And then in the worldly affairs, you could have someone, like for example, marriage. A person wants to get married, or wants to keep chaste, so he wants to keep chaste. And so marriage is the means, right? And he wants to have children, so marriage is the means. Conversely, someone might want to fulfill his desires in an unlawful way, right? Or someone might want to steal and acquire wealth in an unlawful way, right? And he does so using means which actually work. But then you might also have a thief who is stupid, and he might try means to acquire wealth which actually don't work, right? So so there's all of these different types of categories of people. So Shaykh al-Fawzan makes the comment here around this whole point, and especially the point that a believer is more intense in his love for Allah. Shaykh al-Fawzan says that لأنهم, because the believers love Allah with a mahabba which is khalisa, right? It is pure. It is not mixed with anything else. There's no shirk. There is no, when we see the polytheists, we see that they love Allah, they have a love for Allah, and then they also have a love for their deities and for the other things that they worship. Right? So this is a mixed and a tainted type of love. And so therefore their love isn't really a pure type of love. Right? And because it's not a pure type of love, then, as opposed to a believer, his love is purely for Allah Azza wa Jal. It is a khalisa, it is a pure type of love. And this is why the believer is more intense in his love for Allah, and why he is more willing to sacrifice and bear harm, right, and strive in order to please he whom he claims to love, because the love is pure, right? And this goes back to the point that we mentioned earlier. How can it be? So the general overall point here is, how can a believer, a person of Tawheed, not be more diligent and more determined and willing to bear more harms and make more sacrifices, right, in pleasing Allah and being on the path to Allah and aiding His cause, than, for example, a mushrik, who's worshipping a monkey, all right, or another one who's worshipping, a piece of wood or a cross or something. How can that be the case? That can't be the case, because the believer's love for Allah is khalisa, it is pure. This is pure love, whereas these other types of love are tainted, corrupted, mixed, shared, and so the love clearly cannot be that strong. Rather, the love of those people is more intense for their deities than it is for Allah Azza wa Jal. Right? So anyway, this is all showing really the effect of ubudiyyah to Allah Azza wa Jal. This should be one of the manifestations of ubudiyyah to Allah Azza wa Jal. So the fact that, and this allows us to clearly see as well, to analyze and to take stock of what's going on, that if we see, for example, greater efforts by way of, for example, the missionaries, for example, right, Christian missionaries, or we see greater efforts from the Yahud and the Nasara and the Mushrikeen and things like that, and greater sacrifices and in order to pursue their cause, then that means clearly we must clearly, as Muslimin, we must have a clear weakness in the muhabba, in the love, and therefore in the ubudiyyah, the servitude to Allah. So all of these things, they follow on from what the points which are being raised here. So then Ibn Taymiyyah continues, and he gives an example of those types of people that he just mentioned, with a corrupt type of love, following a method that doesn't even work. Right? That's the worst type of situation to be in. To have a corrupt type of love, and then to pursue a method or a route to reach it, which actually doesn't even work. Right? So he says, كما يفعله المتحورون في طلب المال والرئاسة والصور في حب أمور توجب لهم ضررا. So he says, ولا تحصل لهم مطلوبا. He says, like for example what is done by those misguided people who pursue wealth, and they pursue leadership, and they pursue like images, meaning images of lusts and desires that they pursue. They pursue all of this in things which is going to bring them harm, and yet they do not even achieve what they desire. Right? So they have a corrupt type of love, and they never reach what they're trying to pursue anyway. Right? This is the worst type of situation to be in. Like we said, many examples, like you could have a thief, who desires to steal from people and burgle people, but he's so incompetent and thick that he never reaches his goal, right? So he even doesn't get the reward of his evil crime. Meaning, like, it's a really sad situation to be in. At least as a criminal, at least try to benefit from the thing that you're trying to pursue, right? Because you're going to get punished for it, right? So you've at least achieved some benefit in the worldly sense, even though what you're doing is unlawful, right? And you're going to get punished for it, right? But even worse is the one who has the same type of corruption, but he uses means because of the corruption of his intellect and his imagination, and he doesn't achieve what he's trying to achieve, right? But his evil is still the same because his intent is still there, but he never benefited, in the worldly sense. So he's still going to get punished. So you're in a worse situation, right? So you have also this category of people, to keep in mind. And as Ibn Taymiyyah says, this is the worst type of situation to be in. Then he says, then he continues, after concluding all of this point, he says, وَإِذَا تَبَيَّنَ هَذَا, when all of this is clear, meaning all of this discussion that we've been making, in this lesson so far, and in the previous lesson, and in the previous lesson, the general point he was making was that that for you not to be captivated and attached to material things, you have to be captivated and enslaved to Allah Azza wa Jal. And in order for that to happen, there are many traits and qualities that a believer must possess. And one of those key traits and key qualities is that you love for the sake of Allah and that you hate for the sake of Allah, right? And that you love Allah and His Messenger more than you love anything else. So the issue of love here is the key central element here, because the heart and its love is the foundation of worship, right? Love is the foundation of worship. Everything springs from this love. And so therefore, this is why there's all of this discussion about love, right? Loving Allah and, loving His Messenger and loving, giving them precedence and so on and so forth. And then along the path, Ibn Taymiyyah discussed about how a person can love well